I wanted to do a video and kind of open up the kimono. I know a lot of you probably wonder all the time, well, when the camera is not rolling, when the speakers, when the Danielle DiMartino booths, the Jim Rickards, the Jim Grant, the Peter Schiffs, maybe throw my name in there, George Gammon, when they're back in the green room, when they're talking amongst one another, when they're out at dinner, what types of topics are they discussing? What investment secrets are they reviewing? Or are they kind of bouncing off of one another to get their feedback to see if it's something that they want to implement within their own portfolio? Maybe it's a speaker here at the New Orleans Investment Conference. Maybe it's a hedge fund manager. As you guys know, I speak to a lot of the people that would be considered maybe talking heads on CNBC. I think some of the better talking heads, but these are guys and gals that manage, quite frankly, billions of dollars. And when you see them on a podcast or when you see them on a YouTube video, I know that you value the information, but you're thinking to yourself, okay, what are they not telling me? There's got to be some secret that they're holding back, that they're saving for their own portfolio, or there's got to be some sort of insider intel that they're not sharing with the general public, that they're only comfortable to discuss with George or Jim Grant or Danielle DiMartino Booth when they're out at dinner. Well, today I'm going to share with you exactly those types of topics. Again, I'm going to open up the kimono and you guys are going to see exactly what we're discussing, what our concerns are, and how the smart people, and I don't know if I include myself in that category, but how we are investing to make sure that we're going to build wealth and thrive throughout the rest of this decade in a world of bigger governments, crazy central banks, and increasingly authoritarian regimes. So let's dive right into this investment report. And let's see, we'll go ahead and zoom in here on the whole thing. And there's going to be a PowerPoint presentation. So just a quick version of this, what everyone's talking about right now are commodities. And all the pros, all the smart pros that I know are talking about the commodity space. Now, it might be gold, it might be oil, uranium, coal, lead, but this is what they're talking about, this long-term super cycle. Now, this is an older chart. It probably goes back to 2018 or so. Since this time, we've come up substantially. But as you can see, these long-term super cycles last, call it 10, 15 years. So what's my favorite, and what have I discussed with other professionals that they're keen on as well? Well, coal, and it's run quite significantly, as you can see. But a lot of people are waiting for a pullback to go ahead and buy at a better price, because they know that once these things start to run, and you can see it started to run in, call it 2020, 2021, they don't just go for a year or two. They go for 6, 8, usually over 10 years. And a good example of that would be lead back in the early 2000s. I think that if you can see this chart here, we're probably somewhere right around here or right around here in terms of coal. So it's just knowing when to buy when everyone else is selling, and then riding the next explosive wave higher. So when do you do that? Well, as far as timing, who knows? Nobody knows exactly, but some of the things you can look for is the 3-month inversion with a 10-year as far as the treasuries. So this is just the 10-year yield minus the 3-month. So when that goes negative, that implies there's an inversion of the curve. So usually the two, as you guys know, the 2-year and the 10-year, that's like the 90-95% probability, but it doesn't give you much timing. It could be 18 months, 24 months, 12 months. But this is a little bit better for timing. And then really the insider intel, and I got this from my good buddy Jeff Snyder, all you guys know who he is to compare the nominal or the existing 2-year treasury yield with the, ready for this, write this down, fitted instantaneous forward rate 2 years hence. Just a crazy, crazy name for a metric, but this is basically the market predicting with some sort of algorithm what the interest rates are going to be 2 years out. So when this is trading under the actual current 2-year treasury, that's another signal that most likely the Fed is going to be reversing course, just like this inversion of the curve between the 3-month and the 10-year. So if I'm timing this, what I want to do is buy T-bills right now, just keep rolling them over, very little counterparty risk, less than a bank, and you're getting 3-4%. And maybe roll them over once a month, maybe roll them over once every 3 months or so. Keep the powder dry, and once you see one of these indicators, then you go ahead and cash them out, or maybe even better, you would buy them at that time if you're kind of speculating, and then you would wait until the Fed drops rates. That typically, or that usually, is going to mean the commodity prices are coming down due to a recession or some sort of black swan event. You sell your treasuries, you probably have a capital gain there, and you take that dry powder and go ahead and buy the commodities for the long term and just ride that cycle up. So this is what I'm doing. This is what a lot of the pros that I talk to right now are talking about when we're having a beer at dinner, or when we're just sitting down grabbing something to eat, or when we're in the green room. So another thing that we are discussing, and this is interesting. I might get in trouble for telling you guys this, for revealing this to you, but a lot of the pros, a lot of the hedge fund managers, a lot of the talking heads that you see in financial media, they're scared to actually be completely honest with you. Now, I'm not saying they're ever lying to you, but they're not sharing 100% of their ideas with you, because I think they're scared of being labeled a conspiracy theorist. So what we're going to be going into now is the conspiracy theorists, or as you guys know, that's just a new term for critical thinker. The critical thinker's guide to investing. So it's not just, okay, here's why you should invest in commodities. Here's the supply side, here's the demand side, but moving into a fourth turning, into a tumultuous time when the central planners and authoritarians are going to try to take more and more of your freedom and liberty away from you. And they're trying to push us more towards Marxism and away from free market capitalism. In this type of period, how can you invest well, or how do these elements affect the supply-demand dynamic that will play into the commodity space, into this long-term commodity super cycle? That, again, I'm not saying buy now, because prices are very high. You got to wait till they come back down, put them on a watch list. But again, I think what I'm trying to say is a lot of the pros, they're talking about commodities, but they're not being completely forthright with why they like commodities. So let's get into that right now. And we're going to start by going back about 500 years.
Niccolo Machiavelli, 16th century Italian diplomat, political thinker, arch baddie. His name conjures up everything but sly about human behavior.
Well, we have an image of what the Machiavellian is. I mean, the word is in our dictionaries. He is an adjective.
Machiavellian, astute, cunning, intriguing. And it's all because of this, The Prince, written 500 years ago. It's about power, how to get it, and how to keep it.
It can be said of men that they are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. They shun danger and are greedy for profit. Therefore, it is necessary for a ruler who wishes to maintain his position to learn how to be able not to be good.
Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513. It was shocking then, and it's shocking now. Chapter 17, of cruelty and mercy, and whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the contrary.
There's absolutely nobody in history who's had more influence on modern affairs, on politics, than Niccolo Machiavelli.
So what are we to make of The Prince on this, its 500th anniversary? How useful and relevant is it today?
One of the most important books ever written, and a really useful how-to guide for contemporary reality.
Was Machiavelli right? Should we all learn how not to be good? Is it better to be feared than loved? And who are the 21st century Machiavellians?
So this is what the pros, a lot of them, are talking about when I have discussions with them on their investing strategies in private. And they're talking about how politicians, how the global elite, how the Davos types are going to impact the supply-demand dynamics of commodities. So that's Machiavelli, if you didn't know who he was prior to this. And pretty much his ideas is where we get the phrase, the ends justify the means. And he has been a massive influence, not just on the politicians of yesterday, but the politicians that we have, the Davos types, the IMF, the World Economic Forum, the Bill Gates types that we have trying to rule the world and rule over our daily lives right now in the present in 2022, and what we're going to be dealing with, probably even more so, into the near future. So, like I said, he's got a ton of influence on today's politicians. But if you don't believe me, you'd have to ask yourself, okay, well, how much influence does Henry Kissinger have on today's politicians? And then your answer there would probably, oh, well, Henry Kissinger obviously has a lot. Okay, well, then you got to ask the next question, which is, did Machiavelli influence Kissinger? And the answer there is unequivocally yes. Just to give you some anecdotal evidence, Kissinger was so influenced by Machiavelli, according to many people, that they actually put him on the cover of the most recent version of The Prince, the book by Machiavelli. And so you say, okay, well, if he was really influenced to that degree, how many of today's politicians really kind of bow down to the altar of Henry Kissinger? How many politicians bought into the Kool-Aid, if you will? And really, again, it's the Machiavellian principles. And how many of the global elite? Well, you guys know one of my favorite people in the world is Klaus Schwab with the World Economic Forum. So let's look at this next video and see if by chance maybe he was influenced by Machiavelli via Henry Kissinger.
Let me go back to the time you said when you came here, it transformed your life. Was there a course, a professor who really made that difference for you?
Yes, there was one course, one seminar of Henry Kissinger, which really opened my eyes. I wasn't accepted to the seminar, but I sat in. I think he let me in because I was German. And it was relatively shortly after the war. There were not too many Germans here. And this created a friendship which has endured until today. And, Henry has been several times in Davos. And I think it was mainly participating in his seminars that I developed my interest for geopolitical affairs.
There you go. So the answer there is yes. Kissinger is even in his own words, Klaus would admit that he had a massive impact on his thinking. And you can just replace Kissinger with Machiavelli and The Prince. So then the next question becomes, okay, well, how much influence does Klaus, the IMF, the UN, the EU, the global elite, how much influence do they have on corporate America or on just global corporations? Let's call them the mega corporations. Well, let's go to the World Economic Forum homepage or their website, and they list a lot of their corporate partners. And I'm just picking some random corporate partners of theirs. And we just chose the banking and capital market sector. And you can see they've got, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands of these corporate partners. But this is just one category, in one industry, and I just selected some of them that you'd be familiar with. Bank of America, Credit Suisse, they've been doing well lately, haven't they? Deutsche Bank, another one of everyone's favorite. Goldman Sachs, HSBC, JP Morgan, MasterCard, NASDAQ, London Stock Exchange, and PayPal. Huh. The group that thinks that you owe them $2,500 if you say something that is unapproved, that they don't like. Swift. Didn't we leverage Swift somehow to try to push back on Russia or Putin? I think we did. Visa, another one that everyone knows. And then we go on to media and entertainment. We got Bloomberg, Google, Facebook, NBC Universal, New York Times, Sony Group, and TikTok, which is one that surprised me, but shows you how much influence this gentleman up here on the right actually has. Said another way, how much influence Machiavelli has on the world today, a world that you and I interact with almost every hour. So we understand the tactics of these politicians and mega corporations. And when I say mega corporations, I'm talking about the CEOs and the decision makers and whatnot. It's really ruthlessness, a lack of ethics, deceit. There's a lot of words that I could use, but that pretty much sums it up. But what we haven't discussed yet are their beliefs. And this is very, very important if we're to analyze how they are going to impact the supply-demand dynamics of the commodities that we discussed at the beginning of this report. So I would really kind of say it a different way. I don't know if what are their beliefs is the right question. It's what is their religion, or maybe even better, what is their cult? Because when you look at it, break it down, it's exactly what it is. So their cult starts off with a gentleman by the name of Robert Malthus. You guys probably know the term Malthusian. So the gist of his ideas kind of summed up in this sentence: the power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man. Malthus argued there are two types of checks to hold population within resource limits. Positive checks, I like how he says positive, implying that they're somehow good, would be, just simply raise the death rate. Preventative ones lower the birth rate. And the positive checks include hunger, disease, war. Some fantastic things that we should all welcome into the global society at any time. Welcome it with open arms, just understanding that if we get a good old-fashioned disease or war, that'll reduce the population, and that's better for everybody, because then we get more into alignment with the planet Earth and the resources that we have at our disposal for the few who are lucky enough to survive. And you say, oh, George, well, the global elite haven't adopted this. This is just this Malthus guy way back in 1834. No one today is really talking about reducing the population or reducing global population growth. All right, let's go ahead and cut to the next video. And this is from everybody's favorite computer geek, Bill Gates.
As we make the world healthier, is the population going to get so big that feeding everybody and maintaining the environment is going to be impossible? We go from less than 1 billion in 1800, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.4 billion where we are today. So Melinda and I wondered whether providing new medicines and keeping children alive, would that create more of a population problem? What we found out is that as health improves, families choose to have less children. So we've taken that chart that shows the global population growth, and we've actually extended it out all the way to 2100. And we can see that instead of continuing, it actually flattens out. Another way to see that is through this rate of population growth. And you can see that in the 60s, that reached a pretty high number, over 2% per year. And it's now come way, way down. Now, 11 billion people, still a lot, but the good news is that the faster we improve health, the faster family size goes down. And so we can feel great about saving those lives.
And the question then becomes, as opposed to what, Bill? You feel great about saving the lives as opposed to feeling bad about saving lives? Because let's just say your little trick didn't pan out. Poor people continued to have kids. Would you then feel horribly depressed because you saved the lives inadvertently or unintentionally, let's say, of millions and millions of people, assuming that you did? I mean, you can see the psychotic nature in this whole concept. And I want to point out that even if you're a Bill Gates fan, recognize he's lying to you right there. I don't know if you guys caught the lie, but he said that historically what happens when people get healthier, they have fewer kids. Wrong. No, that is not true. It's not when they get healthier. It's when they get richer. So why did he switch it up? Why did he spin that? Because if you're gonna say people get richer, then what do they require? They require more energy. You see, and he doesn't want you using more energy. He wants you using less energy. And you say, George, well, won't that hurt demand? Why should I invest in commodities? Well, look at what that's done to the commodity price over the last year. After decades of Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab type of policies. But let's keep going here. It's not just Gates. How about his former wife? French Gates, they're calling her now. And she says that more gender equality in these four sectors will change all of society. Really, Melinda, how? Well, we have to get more funding for female politicians at all levels. And we have to look at the barriers that will keep them from getting there. She told Fortune, until we get women represented in all seats of power, you're not going to have representation of society in the Supreme Court. Because if you look at how Americans really feel about Roe versus Wade, meaning abortion, no matter which side of the aisle they're on, what was done doesn't represent what people believe, meaning that all women are pro-choice. All women just want to have 100 abortions. You know, all women are in favor of abortions. This is kind of her big idea. And if you get more women out there, then it's going to be fantastic, because then we're going to have more abortions. Now, she doesn't come out and say that. You see, it's all under the guise of, well, women's rights. We have to give women their rights. But listen, Melinda doesn't care about women's rights, nor does Bill Gates. What she cares about is decreasing the population. And it's not just decreasing the population, because today's global elites aren't just Malthusians. Today's global elites are eugenicists. So Melinda Gates can sit here and talk about women's rights all she wants, but the net result of her actions, if we have more abortions, let's say in the United States, is going to be the following. From the Washington Times: abortion, #1 killer of African Americans. So you see, it's not about women's rights. It's not even about reducing the population growth. It's about reducing the population or population growth within a certain segment that maybe those global elite find inferior. I would argue they do, because I think that they're, like I said, not just Malthusians, but they're also eugenicists. So if a lot of these ideas seem familiar with you or familiar to you, it's probably because you just saw them in a recent movie. It was one of these action hero movies that where the bad guy, or so we thought, was Thanos. Let's check out a clip.
Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution. Genocide. But random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass.
Congratulations, you're a prophet.
I'm a survivor. who wants to murder trillions. With all 6 stones, I could simply snap my fingers. They would all cease to exist. I call that mercy.
Mercy. And which I think if you had a couple beers with Klaus or Gates, they'd say the exact same thing. It's that no one else is willing to make the hard decisions other than them. And, they're just like Marx in the sense that they understand the problems. It's just when it comes to the solutions, they completely derail. And their solutions are catastrophic to a problem that is potentially legitimate. But I think this is how they see themselves, just like how Thanos saw himself in this movie when his objective, which he achieved, was to literally eradicate 1 in every 2 people in the universe, where at least Gates and Klaus, their objectives are limited to the planet Earth, or so we think. But then the useful idiots, and we'll talk about them more in a moment here, because they definitely play into what will happen with future commodity prices. They take the ball and run with it, and they try to turn this into, you guessed it, the quote unquote science. Right here from good old Forbes magazine, in the science category, by the way, the science of Avengers Endgame proves Thanos did nothing wrong. If you go through this argument, they're basically sticking up for what he said. Sure, got too many people, don't have enough resources. Kill some people, great, problem solved. But I don't think that the global elite here, I don't think their intentions are purely selfless. We want to use that term. I think they're also very selfish. And the way I'll explain this to you is through this chart of energy transitions. So we see going back to 1800, the majority of energy that we use is biomass. So that's like cow dung, lumber, etc. And then we go ahead and discover coal. Great. Now we're using that, a much better, superior source of energy. It's far more dense. And you bring along oil, nat gas, nuclear, and then the renewables that we've seen lately. Well, you'll notice that this chart is almost identical to a chart of population growth. And these 2 charts would be almost identical to a chart of global GDP growth. So like my good buddy Art Berman says, energy is the economy. And if you would not have had this exponential rise in the availability of energy, you would not have had an exponential rise in the population growth or the standard of living, for that matter. So the global elite look at this and say, okay, well, if we have exponential population growth, well, if this line, the amount of energy we have access to doesn't grow at the same rate, something's got to give. And we think renewables are great, but you notice they always say they're trying to replace fossil fuels. No. We don't need to replace the existing energy. We need to add to it if we're going to maintain or improve the standard of living of not just the people in the United States and Europe, but the poor countries in Africa, South America, and in Asia. So basically the global elite look at this chart and they say, okay, well, population growth goes parabolic. Energy, limited resource, if that flatlines, then that means GDP is going to flatline. But if we get more and more people, then the standard of living per capita is going to have to go down. And I don't want my standard of living to go down. So we've got to pull 2 levers here. We've got to get all the other people to use a lot less energy, and or we need to reduce the population, or as they would put it, get back to equilibrium with the planet. And so once we kind of understand this very simple concept, you can start to see and build a framework. You can start to see what their objectives are and build an investing framework around that. And again, most importantly, determine how these types of policies, how these narratives are going to impact the supply and demand dynamics of those dirty, dirty, dirty fossil fuels or commodities that I want to own in my own portfolio for the next 10 to 15 years, as long as I'm buying at the right price. So let's move on here. Like we said, their objectives, pretty darn clear, pretty simple, straightforward, once you distill them down to something that's just basic. Number one, reduce energy use, especially in rich countries. Number two, lower the birth rate, especially in poor countries. Got to have that sprinkling of eugenics on top of the Malthusianism. and then, of course, gain power, control, and wealth. All right, well, that makes quite a bit of sense. But what I want to point out is these people will always push, let's say, climate change. But this has nothing to do with climate change. I can assure you of that. It has everything to do with too few resources and too many people. But they can't just come right out and say that, hey, we're Marxists that favor genocide and eugenics. Go ahead and do exactly what we say. Trust me, these lockdowns, they're for your own good. Trust me, this, keep it YouTube friendly, this medicine that we're requiring you to take, oh, trust me, that's for your own good. Not too many people would believe them if they came right out and stated exactly what they are. It's a tough sell. So they need some good marketing. So what was the marketing concept they came up with? The good old Club of Rome in 1991. The Club of Rome here, in one of their books, kind of like a how-to guide, they say every state has been used to classify its neighbors as friend or foe. The sudden absence of traditional adversaries has left governments and public opinion with a great void to fill. New enemies have been identified, new strategies imagined, and new weapons devised. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. And then they conclude by going back to their default worldview that the real enemy is humanity itself. You see, so that's what you've got to understand here. Whenever you hear climate change, this, climate change, that, from the Gates types, we'll call them the global elite. I'm not saying that climate change isn't a problem. What I'm saying is they don't care about it. The only thing they care about is reducing the amount of commodities used and reducing the amount of people that are using them. So I think the best way to kind of get this sorted out in your head here, and as far as influence, and I think this is very important because it helps you build this framework to better understand the world. And if you don't understand the world, especially now, how can you expect to invest in it successfully? So you've got Machiavelli, Malthus at the top. They really influenced Kissinger. And then we've got the Club of Rome here. This started in 1968, prior to Klaus starting the World Economic Forum. Didn't call it that. It's called something different. But they started in 1971. And all of these entities really had a massive impact on Klaus. And so then Klaus has influence, if you will, over what I call the useful idiots here on the right. And then that would include these celebrities like DiCaprio, Bono. You've got CEOs that fall right in line. They're kind of disciples of Klaus, whether it's Bezos, especially Benioff. Got politicians that pretty much use scripts that are given by Klaus. They use his words exactly, Trudeau, Biden. And you get the finance guys that just hop on board because they don't care about anything other than making money. And they know that if they hop on board with Klaus, especially this ESG, it's going to be windfall profits for them. So then you got the useful idiots, the teachers, the professors, the media, and a lot of our fellow average Joes and Janes out there. And they are heavily influenced, as you know, by the celebrities. They're manipulated by the politicians, and therefore they regurgitate and actually believe these ideas that the global elite espouse, or at least the narratives they try to push, not knowing that their true objectives are something entirely different. And I would include the UN, the IMF, and then a lot of the central planners. And I just lovingly refer to them as the lizard people, as does my good friend Tom Woods. I got that from him. So we'll talk about the lizard people here in a moment. Just to really make it super easy for you, we got three buckets. This is kind of how I see it in my mind. You've got the people who want to reshape the earth, people who just want to gain power, control, wealth, the lizard people, and then the useful idiots, do-gooders. So Machiavelli, Malthus at the top, they're influencing these first two buckets. And then the Klaus types influence the politicians and the do-gooders, and the politicians have to basically pander to the do-gooders that now have this distorted worldview. And they don't even know it, but they're just really the pawns of the people who want to reshape the earth, like the Klaus, Gates, UN, IMF types. So I think if you take this framework and look at the world today, whether it's the policies towards Russia, the lockdowns in 2020, you've got to ask yourself, okay, is what they are pushing, whether it's the mainstream media, these central planners, does this create a world where we use less energy or more energy? We've got the sanctions against Russia, which will most likely create food shortages in many of these poor countries. Interesting, isn't it? That this just happens to be the objective, the explicit objective of a lot of these people is to decrease population growth. Well, I can guarantee you one thing that will do that quickly is food shortages. Another thing that will do it very quickly is World War III. So you look at the United States policies toward Russia and China, and you kind of scratch your head and you say, what is going on? Are these people out of their minds? Even the lefties are now warmongers. Don't they realize that we don't want to get into a nuclear war? And it just, the things they say and their policies, it just makes no sense. But it makes a lot of sense if you take a step back and remind yourself that their objectives are to reduce energy use and lower the birth rate. Nuclear war would solve both those problems, just FYI. So then the question becomes, okay, George, they might have these goals. I buy that. But really, I mean, this Malthusian stuff, it's been proven wrong over and over and over again. And aren't these people going to come to their senses and just say, okay, we understand that if we allow human ingenuity to take over, we're going to solve these problems? Well, that's a good rebuttal. But let's go back to 1972 and the Club of Rome. We talked about them before. And let's go over some ideas they had back then. And we'll see if they've been disproven and what the people who maintain or what the people who hold these ideas dear, if they changed their viewpoint or if they just doubled and tripled down.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display emanating from Australia's largest computer is a picture of the condition, past, present, and future of planet Earth. The program was originally devised by a scientist working from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, J. Forrester. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it. The program, called World One, doesn't pretend to be a precise forecast. What it does for the first time in man's history on the planet is to look at the world as one system. It shows that Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for much more than a few decades. It shows that simply cleaning up our car exhausts and making some small effort to limit our families simply isn't enough. As population increases, the quality of life decreases, and the supply of natural resources decreases. But have a look at this curve here. This is called the Z curve, and it represents pollution. Now, predictably enough, as the population increases up to 1980, pollution increases. There's more rubbish. But from 1980 to the year 2020, pollution really takes off. This is assuming, of course, that we don't do anything about it. So the year 2020, the condition of the planet starts to become highly critical. And if we don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero. Pollution is going to become so serious, right out here, that it will start to kill people. So the population will diminish. Right back here, less than it was in the year 1900. And at this stage, around about the year 2040, 2050, civilized life as we know it on this planet will cease to exist.
So would anyone argue that it's 2020 now? I mean, are we just in dire? I mean, they might say we're in dire straits, but let's be honest here. Let's look around. Is it really that bad? Is it bad enough to where you would say that humanity, not because, and again, we're not talking about global warming here. We're not talking about climate change. We're simply talking about too many people and not enough resources. So let's just set climate change on the side for a moment. Do you really think that just because of a lack of resources or rubbish, as he put it, humanity is going to be extinct in 20 years, 30 years? I mean, come on. So it's ridiculous. So you'd think that, okay, George, this is obviously nonsense. They've been proven wrong. Therefore, they'll make an about face. All we have to do is present them with this logic and problem solved, right? Again, you got to remember, this is a cult. This is not logic we're talking about. This is not rational thinking. This is not real science. This isn't critical thinking. And if this is a cult, which I believe it is, we've got to look at what happens when a cult is presented with one of their beliefs that turn out to be objectively untrue. So I found this very interesting. This was done by, I believe, a psychologist named Leon Festinger. And what he did is he followed around one of these doomsday cults. I think this was back in the 1950s. And there was a specific day where all these cult members thought the alien ship was going to come down and, you know, pick them up and take them off to the mothership or or whatever, right? And he watched them because that was the question. Are these people, you know, once the alien ship doesn't come down, assuming that it doesn't, are they going to say, oh boy, I guess we were wrong? Or what would their response be? Let me read this to you. He was unsurprised by the sudden proselytizing after the prophecy's disconfirmation. He saw the cult members as enlisting social support for their beliefs to lessen the pain of their discomfort. Basically, what he's saying is, no, they didn't say we were wrong. They just doubled and tripled down. And their behavior confirmed predictions that cognitive dissonance theories, that's really what's at play here, whose premise was people need to maintain consistency between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So my point is this is ingrained into the psyche. This is cognitive dissonance we're talking about in the people around us and the entities that have massive amounts of power that we see them wielding even at an exponential rate since 2020. And so the next question I want to pose to you is, if you had to place a bet right now, would you assume that in the next 5 years, government is going to be bigger or smaller in the United States, in the West, as an example? I think most of you would say it's going to be bigger. It's going in the wrong direction. Well, let's think this through. I've just got this simple chart right here that displays when government power goes up, so does the evilness of politicians. And this makes sense if you ask yourself, well, what is required to be a good politician? You have to be evil. You have to have no ethics. You have to be morally bankrupt. You have to be a good liar. In fact, a better liar than your opponent. And as the government power increases, it's going to attract those who have an insatiable lust for power. So if we are to say that government is going to be bigger in 5 years, we can also safely conclude that the politicians are going to be, I'm talking about global elite, are going to be even more evil. Believe it or not, than they are today. But they're going to subscribe to the same cult. They're going to be the same cult members. They're going to be pushing the same things. And let's remember that those same narratives that they've been pushing for, let's say, 2 decades have got us into the energy crisis we're in today. That's the main reason that commodity prices are sky high. You see where I'm going with this? So I think that when you look at the world through this lens, it becomes very clear that in the future, I don't know what prices are going to do in the next year, but over the long run, there's going to be significant constraints on supply of commodities due to these psychopaths, these sociopaths, these megalomaniacs that are in power today. So the easiest way to sum this up would just be, I mean, not to toot my own horn here, but kind of what I was talking about on Fox Business the other day. So we'll go ahead and just go right to the internet, as I always tell the editors, and check out this little bit from Fox Business.
You doing anything on the equity side? You buying any stocks here?
No, I mean, I think the best thing people can do right now, if I had to give them some advice, is just understand that we're going into an age, the golden age of political stupidity. And so if you can take the other side of these political mistakes that we see out of the Biden administration or Trudeau up in Canada, I think you'll do well. And I heard another one of your earlier guests talk about commodities. I truly believe we're in a long-term commodity super cycle for the next 10, maybe 15 years. I'm not saying buy now,
right,
but definitely put that on your watch list,
right,
because I think that's the best way to go long political stupidity.
There you go. That's the easiest way that I can say it. And I want to conclude with another quote from Machiavelli that, ironically, I find quite inspiring. It is just as difficult and dangerous to try to free a people that want to remain slaves as it is to enslave a people that want to remain free. So I'd ask you guys on this live stream right now or watching this video, how many of you want to remain free? I know I do. So what the challenge I would have for you is not just to make money, not just to increase the size of your portfolio, not just to grow your wealth as a result of taking the opposite side of government stupidity, but to use those acquired resources and to push back against the authoritarians and the central planners. Because at the end of the day, I don't care how much Bitcoin you've got, don't care how much gold, don't care how much real estate, if you ain't got freedom, you got nothing.